Hello everyone, Linda Gadbois, and I want to discuss briefly the subject or the idea of personal transformation. And one of the reasons I want to talk about this is it's kind of up for us at the global level right now, and also this is one of the specialties that I specialize in my private practice, which is designed to provide people with knowledge and the mentoring and stuff to actually implement knowledge into their life to produce results and to become creative. In other words, but I wanted to first of all start off by kind of defining it a little bit because, well, we have a tendency to think that everybody thinks just like we do, or we're using a general word and we think, oh, okay, well that word means the same thing to everybody. It never does. I was going to say it hardly ever does, but it never does. Everybody has a little bit of a different interpretation of the same word. So while we think we're talking about the same thing, chances are, not only are we not really talking about it, but we can be miles apart on our perceptions as far as general ideas go. So I want to start by developing it a little bit to give us a model that will provide us with a rich understanding of how systems operate so that we can intentionally engage in them as a form of use them as a tool or a technique, or be able to use them as an intentional operation in our own life. Okay, so and one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this subject specifically is because right now it's a theme in the world right now, and that is global transformation. And many people, when they look at the idea of global transformation, it's a little bit overwhelming. I mean, how do you make how do you affect the global situation in your own personal life, right? We're just single little people. How do we produce an effect, right? How do we change things all by ourselves? So, but when we understand the idea behind what we call the macro and the micro, or aligning the personal will with the greater will, it gives us very distinct tools that we can use to know how to act in our own life, to serve as a metaphor, to serve as to represent the same level of consciousness at the world level that is necessary to produce global change. So the way we can look at this is that what I can do in my personal life to help facilitate global transformation is to undergo personal transformation, because it's a smaller scale idea of a larger scale idea that is of the same vibratory frequency. It's of the same nature, okay? And when we're talking energy, we're talking vibratory frequency, we're not talking scale, okay? So I can produce something at a little scale that has the same vibratory frequency as the idea at the larger scale, and in the mind field, so to speak, or the unified field of existence, it's going to produce the same effect because it's of the same vibratory frequency. This is, we don't make that connection a lot of times when we think in terms of energy, and we think in terms of material reality and behavior and stuff. We don't realize that in the subtle energy, less is more. Okay, gross energy, you have to hit something really hard to produce effect. When we go into the subtle realms of pure energy, the harder we hit something, the less it kind of quickly expands and then goes away. The softer effect we have produces an expanded effect over a larger period of time. So when we're into the subtle realms, it's the smaller activity that's of the same nature as the larger activity that actually produces the greater effect. So when we think about it in that terms, okay, yeah. Yeah, we're starting to get it, right? So by aligning ourselves with the global theme of global transformation and engaging in that same process at the personal level, we are in fact imposing a direct influence on the global scheme at the causal level of energy. Okay? So let's talk about how do we do that, right? Because a lot of people think that, like I said, that personal transformation is a phase that we go through, or it's a life transition, or I want to change my career, so I'm going to go through a little personal transformation thing here so I can change what I'm doing, and I call that personal transformation. And once I achieve my new career, well, that's it, right? But that's not, in fact, That's not what personal transformation is. Personal transformation refers to constant and never-ending growth that we intentionally not only engage in, but we self-facilitate, okay? And transformation or self-development, like anything in the universe, exists as energy, right? Everything is energy, everything is vibration, everything exists in a polar state of duality as positive and negative, yin and yang, right? So transformation or self-development, I'm going to use those words interchangeably because they're basically the same idea, is really about, we have two ways that we develop naturally, passively and actively. Passive is how our original development takes place, what we commonly refer to as conditioning. And this is where we're born into the world. The soul, the way to look at the soul that helps you to understand is the soul can be thought of as a seed. Okay? Now a seed, this seed right here is an almond seed, and this seed contains all of the intelligence or the programming necessary that if it's planted in, water and stuff like that, will grow into an almond tree. So we could say that this little seed's destiny in life is to be an almond tree. Okay? It can't be a peach tree, it can't be an apple tree, it only has the potential to become an almond tree. Okay? Well, human beings are the same way. The soul is born into the world as a little, what I call a cluster, some people, a little constellation of qualities that have natural tendencies inherent in them. And tendencies can be thought of as a natural way that they tend to behave, right? And how they tend to behave is based on not the individual quality, but the individual quality as it exists in a relationship or as an interactive quality to all of the other qualities that are part of its little cluster, right? Part of its little seed. And whatever qualities the soul has inherent in it determines the destiny of the individual. And our destiny as individuals is basically a form of storytelling, right? Qualities in our personality develop characteristics which become our character, and our character becomes the storyteller of our life, right? So how we develop ourselves determines what type of stories we're perfectly suited to tell, right? What type of stories we tell naturally without having to think about it, without having to have a conscious thought about it. We end up behaving that way as part of our personality, and so this is how we always are, right? So in the beginning, the soul comes into the world, and from birth up until 7-ish is what we call the formative years. And this is our conditioning. This is the passive, receptive state of the subconscious mind. Doesn't even have a conscious mind. The gray matter in the front of the brain that we refer to as the conscious mind isn't even developed yet. Okay, we're purely receptive at this point, and all of our development is based on outside stimulus that stimulates and excites us, that brings out certain qualities in us that we then develop. And how we develop those qualities becomes our basic personality. So our basic personality, while it forms the basis that burrs our identity, is a partial development of our potential as it pertains to the natural relationship that we exist in with all of our environment and other people. Okay, based on stimulus response, okay? It's not a conscious effort involved, okay? So then the personality becomes the basis that forms the identity, and then the identity is a function of the ego. This is the gray matter behind the forehead that it starts the process of who am I, right? It separates from the parents, from the environment, and it starts kind of taking on a life of its own. If we look at the word identity, ID, break it into two parts, ID dash and then entity, okay? ID is id, which is the word for the ego, and entity means it takes on a life of its own, right? And this is because the identity is somewhat separate from the personality, although the personality burrs it, right? The personality acts out the identity, but the identity perceives itself as separate from its parents, separate from its environment, and this is where we really begin the creative process of self-developing. We become a certain type of person as a self-image that we have of ourselves based on how we perceive ourselves in the outside world. Okay, so and this is still, primarily in our initial development, still a fairly unconscious process. until we hit about the age of, say, mid-20s to possibly late 20s or even early 30s. And this is where we're fully developed at in the passive form, and we've kind of ended up a certain way based on conditioning and everything else. Now at this point in our life, we can switch over. Our society doesn't really teach it, right? Ancient societies used to always have a process that was called the initiation, or where the second birth or the awakening, where we chose, it was a clear choice as to who am I going to be, and we consciously created ourselves at that point. So the active process of what we call self-development is personal transformation, because our core is developed at that point, and we're going to take this core essence as our personality and our initial identity, and we're going to develop it. We're going to continue growing and expanding it into higher and higher forms of expression. And this is a process. Once we realize how we develop, we can use that knowledge as tools to intentionally introduce the proper influence to grow ourselves in desirable ways, okay? So, based on the fact that we know that the reason how we develop initially is based on how we are interacting or how we exist in relationship to everything in our environment, we can say to ourselves, first of all, we have to self-explore. Get a sense of ourselves, get a sense of who am I, right? What is my soul's essence? What dream have I had inside of me that I always envision myself in certain types of situations, doing certain types of things, and being certain types of ways, right? Because we have a dream that we're initially born with as a means of guiding us towards our destiny. It's like a little blueprint that says, hey, this is how you're meant to be. This is the story that you're meant to tell, right? This is your soul's potential for expression. But that usually gets killed or squelched or corrupted and twisted and distorted all along as we're growing up, especially through our teenage years. Oh my God. And we end up here, and chances are some of us have even forgot what our initial dream was. That's how bad it was, right? But or some of us, we have kind of like an idea, but we're responsible, and we're in this situation and stuff like that, so we can't pursue our dream because that would be irresponsible, and we got all these rules now that basically keep us from being who we really are. So, but we end up in a certain situation, and now we explore, get a sense of ourselves, and we create what we refer to as an ideal. Now, an ideal is a model, right? We're always working out of models. Is a model of ourselves as our highest potential, as the very best we can be, as the very best qualities that we can express. And that we're expressing on a consistent basis creates this like higher version of ourselves. I call it the pattern of excellence, right? So we get a sense of our soul. This was historically done with the birth chart, and we create an ideal of ourselves. And our ideal has to require us to stretch into it. We have to grow to become our ideal, or to we have to reach for it. We have to apply ourselves, right? Because our destiny requires all of our potential to be actualized in order to be achieved, okay? So partial potential isn't going to fulfill a destiny. You have to fully apply yourself to life in order to achieve your highest possible expression, or to tell the type of story that you're ideally suited to tell. So at this point, we create an ideal of ourselves that's the best expression of our potential, because potential is like anything else. It exists in duality, is positive, negative, yin and yang, and chances are some of our potential, based on how it was stimulated, developed that potential into a negative quality. It kind of took the worst possible expression, you might say. And because we were constantly being stimulated in that way, we developed that potential to a negative expression instead of developing it to a positive expression. So some of the transformative process is realizing potential that has been inappropriately expressed, and then choosing to express that same potential, that same quality in a different way. So there's different ways to do it, okay? But once we know how we develop, we can know that the primary way to develop ourselves is to realize what part of us we want to develop, what qualities and traits we want to bring out as a means of developing them, then intentionally placing ourselves in specific situations or circumstances where that will naturally be stimulated in us and brought out, or to enter into specific types of relationships where those qualities and stuff are again being stimulated and brought out in us as an interaction with the relationship. Many of us don't realize that the greatest growth tool we have in life is personal relationships. Okay, I mean, circumstances and conditions are certainly powerful growth tools also, but people in particularly serve to really stimulate us and bring out certain parts of our personality, bring out certain qualities, characteristics, and traits in us. And yeah, we have to bring it back to a neutral stance and say, okay, whatever's being brought out in me in a relationship is what I'm going to develop. That's serving to develop me to be more like that, or to strengthen those qualities and traits in me as a result of this relationship. So the way to judge your relationships, we get in relationships many times that are bad for us. They develop horrible traits in us, but we're committed to them, we feel responsible for them. Something happens, or we're used to them because they kind of appeal to that initial conditioning and how we were treated by other people. But we stay in those relationships, and they serve to transform us to become more like the person who's stimulating us, or we become more like our worst qualities, in other words, right? So we have to realize that the way to judge a relationship, to tell if a relationship is good or not, is ask yourself, who do I become in this relationship? What does this relationship bring out in me? Do I like that? And is this how I want to develop myself? Do I want to develop those qualities in myself and strengthen them to become a natural part of my character? Because it will. So if the best part of you shows up in a relationship and you like who you become and it brings out your best qualities, it's a good relationship, and stay in it. If it doesn't, it's not a good relationship for you. And if you stay in it, then you're intentionally developing yourself in a very negative way. Okay? So, but once we understand how we develop on a natural basis, we can use this information in a very intentional way to induce our own, to facilitate our own development, in other words. Another way that we develop from an active perspective is we choose certain qualities as characteristics that we intentionally embody, and we play act, we pretend, we act that way, we act out those certain qualities, and we keep on doing it over and over and over until it starts becoming natural. Okay, this is the idea behind modeling, behind what I like to I like the word pretend, right? Because what we pretend to be, we become. But this is what they mean when they say embodiment. We take a certain quality, we create our body so that it's that way, right? So that it holds that quality. So we're acting confident, or we're acting, centered, relaxed, that type, whatever quality we choose. I mean, there's many qualities, and we study it. What is that? What would it mean to be like that? How would I look if I was that? How would I hold my body if I was doing that? And then we embody that, and we act it out, and we do that intentionally, repetitively, for a period of time until it starts becoming natural, right? And naturally, like most things, if we're trying something new, right, it feels awkward at first, right? It's a little bit weird, right? And we don't feel like ourselves and all that. That's just part of it. Everything new is going to feel awkward. We have to keep doing something repetitively until we start getting a feel for it. And once we get a feel for it, we can start kind of like acting it out more in a more natural and relaxed way, and we will develop that quality and characteristic in ourselves. Just the fact that you have a desire for it and you can imagine yourself being that way tells you that you have the ability to achieve it. We can achieve anything we can imagine. Okay, if you can't imagine it, that's telling you don't bother. Right? You're going to waste your time. But if you can clearly imagine yourself in a certain way, that means you can do it. So keep that in mind. So when you're trying to embody a quality, imagine it first in your mind. Imagine yourself being that way, and then use that template, that idea, to actually produce it, to actually, to act that way, or to actually be that way. And then practice it and practice it and practice it until it becomes normal, until it becomes natural. You do it automatically without thinking about it, without having to try, right? That's how we intentionally develop ourselves. And personal transformation, self-development is, I don't want to say that it always is, because of course outside stimulus is real effective, but outside stimulus only serves to activate or trigger inside qualities, right? So personal transformation is always about qualities that we embody, that we bring out, that we use to interact with the world, that develops characteristics. So the qualities that we embody and we bring into expression serve to develop our character, and our character is our storyteller. So based on how we develop ourselves in terms of our character is how it becomes how we tell our life story, okay? So just keep that in mind, okay? So if you're going to undertake the process of personal transformation, you're going to self-create. In other words, you're going to get a sense of yourself, gain self-knowledge, create a vision of yourself as an image, an ideal model for yourself. Then you're going to intentionally do whatever it takes to develop those qualities, that characteristic in yourself, so that you are ideally suited to tell a different type of story. And when I say different, I don't mean completely different. I mean, it's the same dream that you had, but you're now at a higher, more masterful level of being able to tell that story, which means you're telling it beautifully, right? You're bringing a sense of passion to how you're telling your life story, which is what story is. You know, story isn't about the story itself, but it's how we tell the story. Okay? So, and by doing this and creating the change that you desire in yourself, you become a mini model as a representation of the vibratory frequency of this model that absolutely imposes an influence on the unified field as the subtle energy in which everything is a part of, that produces an effect at the global level. Okay? So just keep that in mind.